So we'll get started here. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about what's referred to as the accounts receivable module, but that's kind of a narrow term because it can be used as a customer sales management or just tracking sales itself, and not necessarily that people owe you money. Some people may pay cash, but you still maybe want the historical invoice for, sometimes there's warranties involved, and so you'll have a serial number on an invoice, and so you want to reference customer management history. So you can see the different things that we can track. I mean, there could be 6 different sessions on this particular function in the People's Choice Premier program. I know some of you that are on the call here today probably haven't used the accounts receivable module in People's Choice Classic. If you have no interest in this, you do not have to suffer through watching this if you have no intentions of ever using this particular module. So I'm going to be doing a quick overview of all the different features, and depending on what questions we have, we can backtrack and go into more detail on some specific functions that maybe the people on the call are interested in looking at a little bit closer. So in the converted data, one that I worked with, I had like 20 years of history, and it was a lot of things, and that needed to be cleaned up to really bring it up to date and only have current stuff. And they had a lot of customers that no longer were either alive or I mean, after 20 years. And so they wanted to delete a bunch of things, and which I did in that particular one. Is it was the best thing to do is to take the converted data and create a whole new blank company. But we copied over all the customers, all the items in inventory or products and services, the bank account where you're posting your AR payments, and started out with a blank company, but all the customers were there, so forth. And so when there's no history detail attached to a customer, you can just go in and just delete it. And so that put them in a position to go and just mass delete a number of customers that no longer were around. And then it was going to be easier to re-enter the 20 to 30 open invoices versus going through and cleaning all those things up. So keep that option in mind if you were kind of wanting to just start over from scratch with the AR, or if you haven't been using it, but you're interested in using it in the upgrade, then you'll see some of the things today that you can do with the program. So thing to keep in mind is if you had your data converted from People's Choice Classic, all of the setup as it was in People's Choice Classic is done for you. And so a little what we'll be reviewing is kind of backtracking to see what had already been set up in Classic that got brought over, and then where there's places to look at new features that maybe you want to get implemented. I'll leave it open to talk about the accounts payable feature. We can get into that. The feature that most closely resembles accounts payable is the unpaid bills that's in the People's Choice Classic program, but it's a much more sophisticated accounts payable program, and many in this class are still just all they want to do is direct disbursement, enter in the check that paid for particular expenses or post the revenue, and so they're not interested in the receivable or the payables feature that are in the system. So the other thing to keep in mind, I'm going to get a little geeky here, is People's Choice Desktop, the upgrade, can be set up to be on a cash basis or an accrual basis. And basically, the main thing you need to understand is People's Choice Classic, the accounts receivable module, was set up on a cash basis. And so when we converted it to a cash basis. So your converted data is on a cash basis. There is a way to convert to an accrued basis, but I would highly recommend that you work through the support department, and hopefully if you need to do that, you have an accountant to work with, because you're probably wanting to generate a balance sheet and so forth, especially if you're going to do perpetual inventory. So most of our classic users haven't been keeping track of a quantity on hand. They've just entered in the inventory or product items and services, things that they often bill for, and it's used more as a template for a description of a service, or even if it is a product. A lot of people don't do perpetual inventory. They just have things drop shipped, or they'll order the product and ship directly to the customer. So there's a whole variety of things that you can do with this part of the system, and it can get a little bit overwhelming. Let me back up here a little bit. So what I'm going to first do here is, if you, in your classic program, there is a company called People's Choice Enterprises Demo. It's company number 99 in your classic program. And this is a converted version of the demo company that's in there. So when we converted the data, if you were using the accounts receivable module, here's the things that will be covered in the setup. So in the setup, what's already been done is in company information. There's a sales and invoicing tab, and however you had it set up there is how it's going to be set up in the new system. Now, this basic format, there's 4 different formats for invoicing. I mean, if you were going to do perpetual inventory, you'd want to use the product as your default invoice. But most of you that come from People's Choice Classic are going to use the basic. It was laid out and designed to mimic the invoice that was in the People's Choice Classic program. There is a number of options in the way of the numbering of your invoices. There is an option to do none. And somebody I worked with just yesterday, they have meter tickets, and so they have manual paper tickets, and they're entering them in after the fact. And so they're using the number on there. So when you create a new invoice, it comes up with no invoice number. Most of the people, though, have a sequential an invoice numbering sequence, which means if you started with 1,000, then the next invoice is 1,001, and the next invoice is 1,002, and so forth. But there's also what's called a date sequence. A date sequence indicates when the number was. So for a date sequence for today, for instance, it's 2024. So the first 2 numbers are going to be 24, and then it's dash, and then it's going to be the month and the day, and then the -1 will be the first invoice of the day, the second invoice of the day. So some people want that. If you're using sales orders, which you didn't have in Classic, you have some options to match up that when you convert a sales order to an invoice, use the same number. The sales order is not required at all. Most of you are probably just going to enter in the invoice like you did in People's Choice Classic. If you were to implement perpetual inventory, then the sales order is what manages the perpetual inventory, whether it's any items back ordered or the quantity on hand. So you fill out a sales order, and when the sales order, in this case, the product shipped, then you can convert it to an invoice. And some allow editing is one thing. In terms of changing the default numbers, if it is a sequence that you're using, go back to there, you can say, well, I want my next invoice number to be X. So here's what you would have as a starting invoice number. And you could always reset that at any time. Then there's some options that you probably didn't have. You can set it up to make freight taxable. Freight is taxable in some states and not in other states. And so here's where the option is that you can check that out. And then there's often other charges, whether it's a handling charge or some other charge that's on the invoice that can be taxable or not taxable. So these are the defaults that you set up. You can set up if you're tracking where your sales come from, you can set up the referral source of where it's coming from. If you have different deliveries, you can set up how something was shipped or delivered. You do have the option in the salesperson, if you have people selling and you're going to give them a commission, that can actually be set up. You can set up different terms, due upon receipt, or it's due, net 30 days, meaning they need to pay the bill within 30 days, or you're going to probably set up some finance charge situation. And then there's the sales tax rates, and you can have unlimited number of sales tax rates. And each customer can have two sales tax. So if you have a state and local, which many states do, you can do that, or sometimes it's a county tax, but you can have as many sales taxes as possible. So in the inventory side, again, here's where if you were going to do perpetual inventory, you would turn it on here. If you were going to categorize your inventory, you can put it on here. And if you were going to have special pricing levels for different types of customers, those would be handled here. Even if you have all these as no, it still will bring over your product items and services, and you can just use them to fill in your invoices. And that's how most people actually have used People's Choice Classic, and you can continue to use it that way. But if you are interested in exploring, implementing a perpetual inventory, I'll show a little bit here in a bit about that particular one. And then the general ledger defaults that you would set up. If you do have freight, what expense account or income account are you going to have for freight? The sales tax collected. So you would assign accounts that are needed as depending on the things that you need over and above the item, product, and delivery. So those very quick overview of all the different setup options that we have here. Obviously, you have to have the Premier system to take advantage of these features, I should say. So some of the other things that are available in the program settings are our email. That's one thing you don't have in the Classic program, but if you are going to email invoices and or statements, this is where the setup is done for that. You can, the login name, this has gotten a little tricky as far as what they've been really implementing all the different email services, Office 365 being the more common, but Gmail, the security and the dual authentication. There may be some special things that need to be done, and we may need to get involved with your local IT or internet provider to confirm exactly how you need to have yours set up. But once it's set up, then you can email invoices and email statements. The other items that you would be looking at in the setup would be when you, like this one was brought over from People's Choice Classic, where this is inventory. I'd really rather call this items, products, and services, because a lot of people just have services in there. But in the Classic demo program, we had these fictitious items as well as services. And so this got copied over from the People's Choice Classic. So if you had some item, products, and services in your People's Choice Classic data, if you go to this part of the program, you should see all those items you have in your Classic listed. When you bring one of these up, we'll do labor. Most of you, if you're not going to be dealing with quantity and stock, but there are different categories. Most of them you're just going to set up as service. Even the labor one, I usually just set it up as service. And so these things don't really apply on a labor type situation. You may have a cost involved. If you still could put in a cost, or that cost can be entered on the invoice if you are tracking. If you're selling labor $20 an hour, that your cost may be $10 an hour. So if you want to do some tracking of your profits on your different services, you'd be able to do that. And then to get into the real sophisticated part, if you do the perpetual inventory, you can have multiple warehouses where the different products are stored. You could get into style and color, so if you're selling shirts and you want to have a style. I mean, it can be size or color, or it can be style or color. Multi-pricing, meaning you may give this price for this type of customer or this other price for another type of customer. And that can be set up. Or if you have a serialized inventory where you're tracking serial numbers, or what's called an assembly, is maybe you have 3 or 4 items in inventory, but you sell a bundled, you have a kit, so to speak, that maybe includes 3 or 4 items. And so you can create an item here that actually pulls out from 3 or 4 different individual items that comprise that bundle piece. So you can get really sophisticated in that particular thing. And then you can set the default sales account. So this was a labor service, so we distribute it to labor income, where if you were on one of your items, then you might want that to go to hardware sales versus labor income type thing. So each of the individual products can be have its own sales account. And if you get into the full perpetual inventory, then you get involved with the cost of goods sold and what's your general ledger inventory account. So we won't get into that too deeply, but you can, if you were doing that, you can maintain a purchase history. This build is at assembly. So there's things there, but if you're just doing it as a service, the main thing that you would want to do is just put the service, put in the retail price. If you want to track cost, have a cost, and that's all you really need to do and assign a default sales account. So it's much more complicated looking than what you really need for what most of you probably will be doing. So once that's set up, most of you are not going to be doing this. The vendors, same as the suppliers, they can be used. That gets into the accounts payable. But when you have Premier, your vendors, even though if you're using cash basis and just entering them as a check, to update them are this is that vendor where you set up the default expense account. But these are also used on just the general checkbook, like we covered when we looked at checks in the banking section. So unless you were going to implement the accounts payable, the only thing that you would be using in this menu would be updating your services or products in the inventory shortcut. Otherwise, most of you will be working out of the sales. And like the one individual I was working with the other day, that's the only thing they were using in People's Choice Classic was the accounts receivable module. They weren't tracking checks, they weren't doing payroll, they were just using it for accounts receivable. So for them, this is the main menu that we'd be using. Things you don't have in Classic are quotations. You can go in and you can create a quote, and you can send them this quote and what would it be. And then if you do this, you can convert this. If they say, yep, go ahead and get it for me, you can convert it to a sales order. And once it's in a sales order, and you can convert it to an invoice. And once you convert it to an invoice, then it locks this bill as like, this is what was sold. And the invoice is where you enter it. Now, most of you are just going to go to entering in the invoice, just coming in here and just manually entering in the invoice. Now, this shows because it was actually set up so it could be perpetual inventory. They're using the product service invoice, but most of you, in fact, I think I've done it when I've converted based on how I've seen, is in the setup here. I have defaulted it to this basic invoice. So the advantage of that is that's the one that is most similar, matches the classic one. But you can look at the other ones. So when you go into invoicing and you click new, it's defaulting as the basic invoice. But at this point in time, you can always override for any one invoice to one of the other 3 options of the invoice. So, and then here's where this is on a sequential. So this is invoice 102. Now you can search for customers to put on this invoice by company, last name, customer number, phone number. A lot of people are used to a customer number, so if you change it to customer number, you're searching for the customer by their code. If you change it to company, then you're searching by the company name. So once you select that, that's the customer that gets brought up. It defaults to today's date, what's the terms, and then if it is something that you're shipping to, you can click the same and it'll move this over to here. Or you can actually have multiple ship to addresses attached to a particular company. And you can also assign the sales tax to the ship to, because most sales tax jurisdictions are based on where the product is delivered, not where the product is sold. And so in this case, they're both in the same city. So the sales tax isn't affected, but so I just would say no here. This could have been another address other than the main one. You can have up to 999 ship to addresses. And so they each could have a different sales tax rate. So I think we updated this here. So we're going to change that to here. So this is, otherwise you're going to be entering in much like you did before. So you think this was in Classic, and I'm going to sell 5 of something, and it was 5 of the gadgets with gadgets. The cost was $50. Remember on that setup that I had, but the retail was $100, and so the total is $500. It's not marked as taxable, so you can make it taxable so that when that's done, it'll actually calculate the tax. And so maybe you have also labor, but that's not taxable. And so we'll put in labor at $30 per hour, but it's not taxable, so we leave it alone so the sales tax does not change. So you could also, if you wanted to discount, to say, well, I'm going to give them a 10% discount, you could key in the discount, and so that'll update the net. They'll still show $100, but 10% of the 500 is $450, and so then that will also update the sales tax down here whenever you would give a discount. So when I'm just going to go ahead and change this back to 0. So that's quickly, and that's how you would enter it in. Very similar. Instead of hitting F5, you're working with drop-down lists, and so the user interface is much different looking, but the actual end result is pretty much the same. Now, once you go to print it, you click down here to print, and most people will have the standard invoice, but if you have letterhead, typically that's associated with the professional format invoice. So you can play around with these different ones. I'll just go ahead and you can see what the standard invoice is going to look very much like your invoice that you generated from People's Choice Classic. And it's very simple and straightforward. If you're going to email, you can see there's emails here. The email, you do have the option when you're on a customer on an invoice. If you double click on this right here, it actually brings up that customer setup form with the name and so forth on the system. And so you can go in, and if you're going to start invoicing them, then this is where you could go in and enter in their email address. And then that would be filled in automatically when you selected the customer. So from here, you've got your comments box, which you had something similar to that in Classic. Otherwise, it's entering in the invoice, and there isn't what we would call a manual summary invoice like what you had in Classic. Every invoice is going to be detailed, but if you're doing that type of thing, you possibly would want to set to a professional invoice, and then that way you just select. It doesn't really, these amounts don't really matter. If you selected this, for instance, it's going to consider that it was one ordered, but you still could go over here and put in $500 and override the price based on, typically you're not going to sell individual, it's typically going to be a labor charge where you would do $20 an hour, but over here, if it was 4 hours, you would just go ahead and put in $80. So that would be how you would take advantage of those particular features. We only have one payment term. We don't have any salespeople. We're not tracking source, but you could just, you say, oh yeah, it was a walk-in sale. Oops, I better give it to a particular customer. And then if you were shipping, you can track how you shipped a particular invoice. So if you were to print, you do have the option to edit. If you're printing multiple copies, what would be the customer copies. If you were emailing the invoice, you can just show as the subject on the invoice to be the invoice number, or if you want to type in your own custom subject, and then down here you can create your custom body for the invoice that's sent out. And then they are watermarked so that when you do print, you can print a watermark to that's in the background, and a lot of people want to show paid payments on there and print any messages. So once you print, you could see when you do a print review, it's always defaulting to the customer. If you're going to print multiple ones to have a different description at the bottom, you would just print directly and not do a print preview. So this is what the professional one look like, and probably what you may do if you had that particular one is when you went to print, you would choose letterhead instead of standard, and then you would click print. And so it's assuming you already have pre-printed letterhead with your name and everything up here, but this produces an invoice on a regular letterhead. So that's some of the flexibility of how you can generate invoices. Those who do have statements where they don't get paid right away, the statements and finance charges are handled here as well. And in the statement area, you have multiple options. Again, you have your email defaults for sending out statements. The other was for invoices. Your default stunning messages, if you want to go a message that's at the bottom of the statement that your account's over 30 days, this is what we're going to do, or if it's over 60, this is what we're going to do, etc. And then your preferences, and you can choose whether you want the dunning message printed on the statement or not, and then you can set the minimum amount for giving them a dunning message. So there's some flexibility there. Aging is, you print the aging is if it's open item statements only. Most of the customers that use this are using balance forward, but you have the option to go either way. If you do have you don't want to mail statements to people that owe $1, and so you can put in a minimum amount of who gets a statement. Some people still want to send out a statement even if it is a zero balance, because they want to inform their customers of their history even if they paid for everything. And some will still want to send out a statement if it's a credit balance, and that's for balance forward statements. And any comments that you put on an invoice at the bottom, if you want those comments to show up in the statement, then you would also check this box. And then sometimes it's the name of the company and the name of the person are the same, and so they'll say just print the company. I don't need the other thing anyway. So when you go to print, okay, there's these options right here. Okay, today's the end of October. Most people probably they may go back to the first of the year, and I'm talking about the balance forward statement. We'll just say we're going to always show what's been purchased this year. So we'll type in and we'll put this So we'll go to plain paper. How do you want the statements sorted, depending on how many you're mailing? Some want to sort by company name, some want to sort by last name. Again, this open item or balance forward, and I can show you both results. Most will do the basic, some will get into a more line item audit trail, but the basic is what's used 90% of the time. You can do it for all customers, or you can just do it for some customers. And if some customers, then you would come up here and go, I just want to send it to these 3 customers. But so, or you can say none, or if you have a long list, you can actually, if you have different classifications of customers, or if you have your customers divided up into different geographic territories, or if you want to just print for a particular salesperson. So you have some flexibilities on how you would pick just some customers. So since we don't have very many, I'm just going to click all customers, and we're just going to do a print preview. If you were going to email, you would select email. Some people want to print the statement and email it, so you have that option as well. So we'll just go to the print preview, and you can see on a balance forward statement, we picked 1/1/2024 as the start, so it brings it forward the balance as of that date, and then it shows all charges and payments, and then an ending balance, and then down at the bottom it shows an aging of that balance. So we're in October. Typically, we would have charged more finance charges probably every month, and so it would be much larger than that. But they would show on the statement when you generate finance charges. So if you were to do an open item, you could still do that. And there was the open item option in Classic. And if you were using that, then it's going to show just the items that are open. It'll still show the aging of the items, but it doesn't show the running balance and the payments made against it. It just shows the total of the payments. So $1,500 have been paid towards this first invoice, and nothing's been paid towards the finance charge. So some people just like to show the open items and not the balance forward, although a lot of people like the balance forward because it's a historical a transaction for the customer. They can see when they were charged, when their payment was received, and see a running balance of that statement. So if you were to be doing finance charges, you would go in there, and on the customer setup is where you would set up the finance charge, and you're typically going to have finance charge account assigned and minimum based past due. Some people, they'll give them 30 days, and then after 30 days, they'll charge minimum between charges. That's mainly to prevent double charging. So sometimes this will be set to like 25. So if you have multiple people working in your accounts receivable and they send out statements and the other person doesn't know that, if that person goes in and sends them out again, if there was a statement sent within the past 25 days, it's not going to generate it. It's going to say, no, it hasn't been that long before that. Otherwise, you would leave that at 0. Again, in terms of calculating, is it going to be $1? Is it going to be $10? Maybe you're not charging a finance charge for anything under $10. And then, or if a finance charge, let's say it's 1%, or, well, the 1%, you don't want to calculate a 10-cent finance charge. And so if anything calculates less than $1 in this case, it's going to charge them $1. But you could change this to $5 or whatever as a minimum finance charge. And most people do actually a month. And so you can play around with these terms too. Most people don't do finance charges on finance charge, but you can do that if you wish. So this tiered one is get into sophisticated where the finance charge changes based on the age of the finance charge. Not many people use this particular feature, but once you've set this up, then you would go over to customers, and so there is none that have. Let me see here. Oh, I don't think I have them set up in on that demo company. But it would calculate the finance charges, add them to the statement, and there'll be a separate video that will actually go through, because you can do pick and choose, and you can, there's a lot of different options that you can implement while you're doing the finance charge process. Okay, as far as day-to-day work, as you may have noticed that if you pull up an invoice, you can enter the payment right on the invoice. And if it's a cash sale that you're entering in, after the fact, you can go ahead and enter in there and go to pay. And then you could come in and, say, how much did they pay? If they paid everything, you would go ahead and fill in the check number and put it in the amount they paid. Now, maybe they didn't pay for everything. Maybe they only paid $250. And so you could actually apply that. So even though their purchase was $580, with the $250 applied, that the balance due is now $330. When you go to print, it'll show, no, that's not what I want. We'll go to, and we want to show payments. And so there's where it'll show that the total was $580, but they did a payment of $250, and so the balance due is $330. And you could put the comments on there. So that's quick on how the payments can be entered directly as you're entering in the invoice. However, a lot of times you generate the invoice, you email it, mail it, and then the payment comes in the mail, or they call in with credit card or whatever. And so you go to enter payments. Again, you can search by your customers in those same categories as in the invoices. And so we can go ahead and bring up the customer. They owe $1,006. So let's just say, and let's just say they mailed a $500 check. And if you do auto allocate, it goes to the oldest invoice first and then to the next invoice. Or if you want to apply this $500 to a particular invoice, you could click on like this. And so we could put the whole $500 towards this, even though the older invoice, we're not going to apply anything to. If you want to just auto allocate, then if I do auto allocate, it'll pay off this older invoice and then put the difference towards a 59 towards that invoice. So that's how you can kind of control where money is getting applied to. And even though there's an open balance, maybe they ordered something else and you required a deposit, even though they had an outstanding balance, you can key in $100 and click customer deposit. And that will record the cash, but it'll create a credit memo and it'll show that they have a $500 in credit on account. Also, while you're on this page, it's like, I don't remember what this invoice was for $441. You can click on this invoice to drill down and see what it was that adds up to $441. You can do that with, with any of the invoices that are displayed. So if we did get another check from them, and let's just say they sent another check and it was for the full $1,006, you can do auto allocate, apply payment, and payments applied. And so there's nothing that's a balance due. So that's how you enter in the invoice, how you enter in the payment, how you review the statements. Now, if you want to look at a payment register, these are all the payments that have come in the system. So this is that 1,006 plus that 500 that I entered. And then we have some of these older ones. So those of you who do tie everything to a bank statement, what you would be doing is you would be going into banking. You would go to deposits. You would click, these were the converted deposits from Classic, but we're going to click new. And instead of the receipts journal, like what you have in the Classic program, your receipts journal is on your deposit slip. So this is a new deposit. We'll go ahead and date it today. And we go into here and it's blank. Now you could just type in a name and a check number and an amount and what it was for, or you can click on undeposited payments. And so these are the three payments that I entered in today. And so we're going to take those payments to the bank, or so we're going to collect those and add them to the deposit slip. And so that's the total of the deposit. So that's all, or you could go ahead and if somebody had a cash purchase, you still could add to this sale, and maybe it was cash and it was $50, and you could put in their fees, and down here, what kind of income was it? And we're just going to put it in as I will put it as training income. So you can these are receivable payments. This was just a cash sale that came in and gave us the cash. And so when we click done, it's going to add these all up, and then it's going to give you the option to put in a memo. It's going to, these undeposited payments always go to undeposited cash. And then when you deposit it, it credits undeposited cash and debits your bank account. But then the training income of the $50. So this is what the total is. And this is even though it's cash basis, when we're doing it in the checkbook, we still go ahead and post and save it like you would save a deposit in Classic. Now, what you can also do here is you can print out a deposit slip and include the detail. So when you include the detail, this quite often we'll print this out, and then whatever receipt you get from the bank, you might staple to this. But this provides the itemization of what made up this $1,806. It was checks from these companies and that cash sale. So that would tie in with the deposit. So that's how you would tie in your banking. Otherwise, the other banking is what we've covered in another session. So back to here, we're back into customers. Now, one of the other options is what's called recurring invoices. Maybe you have a monthly service charge, or somebody we work with recently, they have a garbage collection business and they charge X dollars per month, or they have an annual charge or whatever. So what you can do with those particular ones, let's see here, I think I have, here's one that was, they use it very heavily. It's actually a data that I would use this particular one, but it's on the customer setup card right here, where you go into customers, there's what's called the master invoice. And when you set up the master invoice, I mean, you can select from your drop-down list and set this up. And so if this was the master invoice, you can set it up for monthly. And so if you had a bunch of monthly ones, you could generate all those monthly invoices at one time. You wouldn't have to manually go in and create each one individually. But then once it's set up, if you go to recurring invoices, so let's say you only wanted to do that one person, you could just select a particular customer. Or you could select, I just want to do all my monthly ones or my annual ones. So you can break things down and mass generate invoices, which can be quite time savings if you have a lot of recurring monthly charges. But if you just wanted to charge, in our case, we looked at bill land and we clicked generate. You could put in your own comment of what would be, and that comment would show up on all the invoices. And you click generate invoices. We only did one because we just selected one customer. You say yes. And then I think I actually did that one for them before. So there's the invoice that was generated for $82.80, but there could have been maybe 20 invoices generated. And then what you would probably be doing would be coming in here and you would probably print a date range. I'll print all of them that were dated today. So you could print all the invoices that way. So there's ways to do mass printing of the invoices. So that's a feature that you could take advantage of. There was a similar feature in Classic, but not many people use it. A payment register just shows you all the payments that have come in, and these would be AR payments. And so you could see this data was from a lot. Let me show you something that wouldn't have. So we don't have a lot of transactions here, but if we just wanted to look at payments that were for today. Filter those out. Why isn't it filtering it out? Other option is, let's look. If we were just select Albert Tire Company and click OK, it's just going to show you Albert Tire. I use this option quite a bit of selecting a particular customer. Sometimes I want to set this to all dates. And when I set it to all dates and pick a particular customer, I see every payment I've ever received from them. And I mean, it could go back years and years on that. So, and again, you do have some drill down options. It's like, oh, what was this? Is that 1006 that we did a little earlier? You can click on the pencil and it'll show you the date that the payment was paid. But then it also shows you that these payments went against these invoices, and those add up to the $1,006. Now, the other thing that can occur, and to show you what happens, so you go into enter payments, and we'll bring up somebody else here. So they owe $1788.94, but for whatever reason, they mailed you a check for $2,000. So what you could do is still do an auto allocate and then apply payment. And it's going to say there's not enough invoices to use up this payment. So what it's going to do is create a credit of $211.06. So it paid off all those invoices, but the overpayment got set up as a credit memo. So it can either be refunded, like so you could go ahead and create a check and refund that 211, or you can just leave it on account and you know there's going to be other invoices coming in the future, and then you can apply that credit to a future invoice. So that's the other items that are of interest is when you are looking at a customer, we'll go back to Albert Tire Company. And you see that there's tabs. We've looked at this tab where the email address is on the detail tab is where you would assign the sales tax. And like so you can have multiple sales tax. If they're exempt from tax, you can check this and put in their exempt number. You can put a credit limit so that if you put a credit limit of $500 and they try to charge $600, it's going to flag them and to say that's over their credit limit. If you were using multiple pricing, I mean, you can do a discount, you can do a code, you can set up different codes, like code A is one pricing schedule, code B is another pricing schedule. There's a pick where you pop up a list of different pricings, and when you go to invoice it, you just select which one you're going to invoice it for. So there's some flexibility in how you invoice and price. And again, you can do some reporting on territory, industry, so you can just assign if you'd have to set up the different categories. And this here is like, yep, I do want to charge them finance charges, so you could set them up so they're eligible for finance charges. And they have, so they have the $500 credit balance. And so all that's maintained on the detail page. And so you have that general detail, but then there's a notes page where you can add a note. It's a call to review system and what other notes you might want to add. And so what's nice about it is it actually date and timestamps that. So you can have multiple notes, but they can all be date and time stamped. That's in addition to the notes that you can put down here in the comment section. If you just want to do a quick, you can just see they have that $500 credit balance. And again, here's where you would go to create that master invoice, where if you want it to just be monthly generated, and then you could just pick the one, and they always service on equipment, and that could be like their $75 a month charge. And so that now they're in the recurring invoice. And so when you go to do the recurring invoice, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you can select the cut. It was, and generate that invoice. So the other option, just while I'm thinking about it in the recurring invoice, it is always possible to, instead of setting up the recurring invoice, is you could go back and say, pull up an older invoice. That's an invoice credit memo. We'll bring up. So let's just say they want to do this again. You can come down here and say duplicate. And so you can pull up any invoice, click duplicate, even if it's not for this customer. So I could go, I'm going to duplicate this order. This is the new invoice number. But it's going to be for them. So you duplicated an existing invoice and signed it to a different customer. And now you can go ahead and print. So that's another versus a recurring invoice. It's like, wow, it's not a recurring, but it's just like that invoice I did last week for this other individual. So I'll just copy that and I don't have to type all this stuff in again. So while we're on this page, you could see some of those other options that I mentioned, that if there was freight involved, you could key in the freight amount, and we have to change this. So change the tax. So it's $21 so far, but no, this freight is taxable. So we can click here, and oh, we don't have it set up for taxable freight. Let's put it down here then. So if you add in another charge, then it's going to update the tax, add that to the 420 to calculate the tax. So there's where some of that flexibility is taken place. And same when you add it to the ship to, you can assign the sales tax to that ship to, like was mentioned earlier. So I covered a lot of territory, and that was what was challenging trying to prepare for today's session. Is it's used in so many different ways, and some features are just used real heavily, and other people, I just want to create simple invoices. I don't need all the fancy recurring invoice and that type of thing. And so I tried to show that it's there, but unless here when we move into the question and answer, maybe we can zero in on some particular things. So I'm short on help here, but I'm going to go ahead and go back to our and do the Q&A. And let me just look at the chat here. I'm not seeing if there's any questions. Is there any questions? Either put them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just say, hey, would you go back and review this part of the what you covered before?
Roger, I have a question. How can you just show how to apply the credits that were out on, someone had paid more than their invoice, and how I apply the credit later on?
Yep, no problem. So let me go back to who was our, I think Albert. One thing I'll show that's also useful, I did overlooked it, is when you pull up a customer, you can click on the sales history, and it'll show every invoice and credit memo that's ever been given to this particular customer. And so they have a $425 credit, but you could see, credit balance, but they actually haven't applied the credit to the $75. So that's what I'll do for how to answer your question. So we'll go into the Albert Tire Company You go into enter payments. This can be, there's actually two places, but we'll do it from here first. So we want to apply a credit memo. So instead of receive payment, we can click apply credit memo, and it'll pop up a window of all the credits that were in the system. So because you could have multiple credit memos. The advantage of having individual credit memos is some businesses, they'll require a deposit before they'll purchase something or, order something, but maybe there's multiple items ordered. One of our customers, a furniture store, so they may have a couch and a bed, but maybe they're two separate orders and they got two separate deposits. And so that way you can pick, if there was more than one, you would pick which one you wanted to use. And then so you put in the date and how much that you're going to apply. And in this case, we got way more credit than what's outstanding. And so you put in whatever date you're going to use, and then you would click the pay coin. And in this case, it put the $75 towards this invoice. And then you would go ahead and apply credit. And so that invoice is now paid off, but they still have a $425 credit balance. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
The other option is you can pull up an invoice. Wrong one. We'll go here. And there's a balance here. They don't have a credit on account, but if they did have a credit on account, you can actually, this would be highlighted where you could apply the credit here as well.
Okay, thank you.
The disadvantage of this is you can only apply the credit to this one invoice, where the other option that I showed, if they had like 5 invoices open, you could auto allocate a credit to all 5 invoices. So that'd be the advantage of using the interpayment window for applying the credit memo, is if you're going to pay off more than one invoice with a credit.
Okay.
Answered your question?
Yes.
Good. Any other questions?
I do have one other question. It's not even related to the functionality of that. Is there a way that I can be enlarging just all of this globally on my screen?
Your screen?
Mm-hmm. Like, how can I make this all just bigger? I went through like my accessibility features on the laptop itself, but it doesn't translate into this program that's loaded on. Is there some way I can?
You have to change your screen resolution. And actually, if you want it bigger, you would lower your resolution.
Okay.
That sounds kind of strange. And when you get into, I'll just jump in there. Well, wait a minute. If you right mouse click on your desktop and go to display settings. Come on. I got 3 monitors here, so it makes things even more complicated. But there's, yeah, I'd have to disconnect.
Okay, but
there's a section here, scale and layout. Okay. And so when you do the display resolution, you want to go from higher, which makes everything much smaller, much more fit on the screen, to a much lower resolution. It'll make everything bigger. And then there's the other option where you can change the percentage for your text, where you can make it 125 or 150. And so but sometimes when you make that change, you would have to exit out of people's choice before that would take effect, and then go back into it. But that's the better way to control the size.
Okay, I will fiddle with that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, this has been recorded, and I'll be sending out the recording, and I'll be sending out some other individual detailed videos that you can watch. I encourage you to go on Customer Hub, where your customer portal is, where you uploaded your data for conversion. There's quite a few how-tos there. You have, I think, links to the YouTube channel. We had a similar class last year, and all the recordings from last year are on the YouTube channel, as well as these recordings. As we're recording them, they are getting published to our YouTube channel. So, and again, I want to encourage you that if you have a topic question that you would like covered in future office hours, go ahead and use that link in the, like if you click on that link in the, should bring it up into here is where you could request, questions from the next class, or errors you're running into, or you want to schedule to work one-on-one for something specific. Or if you have some suggestions, you can fill that in the name, and then we'd be more elaborate on this here. So take advantage of that. And then also, not so much with accounts receivable, this is more on the payroll side, that if you want to register your accountant and they can be given a copy of the People's Choice, it'll be linked to your license, but they'd be able to install the program on their computer at their office, and you could provide them with backups. And like I said, that's most frequently done with some of our payroll users, is they do their own payroll on a period to period, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, but at the end of the quarter, they make a backup and give it to their accountant, and the accountant restores and does all the filing and work for doing the quarterly filing. So keep those things in mind. Otherwise, if there are no other questions, I will go ahead and close out the session. I'll get the recording of this sent out, and we'll have scheduled. I'm reviewing what we will cover for next week. I wanted to see how much we got into things on the accounts receivable, but I think we covered everything that people wanted covered. And so probably next week we'll be focusing more on the reporting side of things, of the checkbook, and how you can customize your income statement and balance sheet, and we touched on it in one of the first sessions, but like the detailed general ledger compared to the detailed account activity and some of those types of things. So there are no other things. I'm going to head and end the meeting, and we'll plan on catching everybody next week. So stop.